Welcome, everyone. My name is Lalit Gunaratna. I'm a member of Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, and I have the pleasure today in introducing Dr. Tom McAuley. Tom and I have been friends since I moved to Canada in 2011 into the St. Paul's neighborhood, where I used to go to interesting talks at the St. Paul's University, and we have similar backgrounds from engineering, and then we have esoteric interests in spirituality and religion. So this is why I'm so excited to hear Tom's talk. So Tom has worked in the water resources engineering for over 30 years, including 12 as a senior advisor with the International Joint Commission. He holds degrees in geological engineering, water resources, and a PhD in theology and ethics. Tom's passionate about how we are shaping the planet's future. And we have very animated conversations whenever we meet about all this. His interests include spirituality, family, hiking, Bernard Lonergan, earthkeeping, just future, sustainable communities, and kayaking. He's taught and spoken in both academic and interfaith settings, and during COVID, he created and taught the course Faith, Ethics, and the Anthropocene at St. Paul's University. His recent work includes a piece of on mindfulness published in Theoforum. So, Tom, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you, Lalith. Uh, Today's presentation is divided into several parts, and I begin with a brief overview of some important indicators that show where we currently stand in the Great Transition, a profound and ongoing transformation of how humanity relates to the planet. This includes up-to-date science-based information on global climate change, possible climate futures, and the alarming decline in biodiversity. Unfortunately, much of this news is sobering. Woven throughout the presentation are reflections from Pope Francis's powerful encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. While many may have heard of it through the media, relatively few have explored its full message. It challenges us to examine our paradigms, goals, and values, and it offers deeply relevant guidance for building a more just, sustainable, and compassionate world. Finally, while acknowledging the scale of the challenges we face, I will close by highlighting some of the encouraging and in many cases irreversible shifts already underway. These final slides offer hope and momentum as we move forward together. It's good to call to mind for a little bit of historical perspective, some of the early wake-up calls. And of course, 1972, the Limits to Growth, which was sponsored by the Club of Rome. I use this one because it's so clear. In the 1992, World Scientists Warning to Humanity. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and the life on it is required if vast misery is to be avoided, and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. Now, 1992 was the same year that there was the Rio Earth Summit, and that was a huge start and momentum for what we're heading towards in the, let's say, the ecological movement. In 2000, this is one of the things that came out of the Rio Earth Summit after 10 years. The Earth Charter, we stand at a critical moment in Earth's history, a time when sorry for that glitch, a little bit of the early history, but the Earth Charter was so well written, and it's worthwhile that everybody take a look at it again, just at least the first few phrases. And we stand at a critical moment in Earth's history, a time when humanity must choose its future. As the world becomes increasingly interdependent and fragile, the future at once holds great peril and great promise. Now, on to Laudato Si. This is Pope Francis is saying, I urgently appeal then for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. If we are truly concerned to develop an ecology capable of remedying the damage we have done, no branch of the sciences and no form of wisdom can be left out. Now, he's saying that throughout the encyclical, caring for our environment is not just a moral duty, but also a spiritual imperative. And it's a shift from viewing the environmental issues solely as a matter of politics, economics, or technology to a more holistic understanding of the human being that encompasses spirituality and a sense of shared responsibility for our common home. Now, a year before Laudato Si came out in 2015, you wonder, where does Pope Francis get all this? Well, he held a joint meeting of the Pontifical Academies of Sciences and Human Sciences in 2014. And there were a lot of invited experts from around the world. And their statement was issued: Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Nature, Our Responsibility. And I'm sure a lot of that helped in writing the encyclical. 5 years later, he came out with Fratelli Tutti on fraternity and social friendship, because part of the whole movement to bring about a just and fraternal world, we have to understand what is social friendship and how we can get beyond all of the polarizations. And 2023, Laudate Deum, Apostolic Exhortation to all people of goodwill on the climate crisis. And part of that, of course, is mentioning some of the recalcitrants and some of the problems that have delayed positive action. Quick update. I put a bunch of slides here together and I won't go through them one by one at all. But one of the ones in the background on the right that you see, it actually was a good one that shows emissions, CO2 in the atmosphere, and temperature. And this was in 2008. CO2 was at 387 parts per million, and temperature was 0.8 degrees above pre-industrial. More recent one here below it, global warming, and you can see all of the different major guardians of databases on Earth temperature. 2024 was the hottest year ever at 1.55 degrees above pre-industrial, and we were at 427 parts per million. Bottom left, you can see the more or less an overall picture in color of how the world has heated up in the last 50 years. You'll also notice that it's heating up much more rapidly in the Arctic. And in the background, on the upper left, of course, all that has been going on since the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put out their first assessment report in 1990, all the way through to the sixth, and a lot of special reports. And all of the COP meetings under climate change, and of course they're hidden in the background, but we can't list them all. But so there's been an awful lot going on, and we're still, unfortunately, in a very serious situation. This brings in a little bit more history and some geohistory, because we have so many, let's say, accurate records from proxy measures in ice coring in Antarctica and in Greenland. And in Greenland, they go back 120,000 years. In Antarctica, they go back 800,000 years, and past atmospheres are caught in the layers in the ice, and they can analyze all of those. And they have the ocean cores also, where they have proxies for temperature. The last 11,700 years, was what we call the Holocene in geology. That was a period of relatively stable climate, you can see here, when all of civilization has actually developed that we know. Agriculture gets underway at about 10,000 years ago. The Industrial Revolution, you see the circle on the bottom there, uh, late 1700s, early 1800s. And then, of course, you can see this upturn, which it is less than a week of time in geological history, the rapid increase in temperature. And note that the peak of the last ice age, 20,000 years ago, was only about 3 degrees Celsius below the pre-industrial average. And now, of course, this is an older slide. It says now 1.1 degrees C. Well, you saw the results. We're scraping in on 1.5 degrees, which was supposed to be the ceiling for the Paris Accord, the first ceiling. And the red shows you the way we should be turning that curve back down. And the question mark is the future. So we're leaving the safe climate zone of the Holocene. We're heading for 2.1 degrees. That's the best analysis so far if all of the pledges of the nationally determined contributions are, are actually actualized. And we're heading towards cascading tipping points. And there's a lot of analysis on tipping points, but let's say the major point here is that between 1.5 and 2 degrees C is about the temperature that most of the scientists agree would start kicking in some of these tipping points. And they would make climate change, let's say, the fight against climate change much less manageable. And I will continue. We can get back to this. I have an extra slide with that in full size. Now, biodiversity decline is another sad thing happening in parallel because of the unwise human project. And you can see on the left here, we depend on biodiversity and ecosystems, and it's a dangerous game. An important report I want to recommend to you here is the 2019 Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And there were thousands of scientists that brought together pretty well all of the studies to condense them and put them into that report. But the headline and the first line say a lot about that report. Nature's dangerous decline, unprecedented species extinction rates are accelerating. Now, the economic risk and decline, once in a while you learn about it, but very, very seldom do you. There have been articles coming out and analysis from different, let's say, global organizations. Like this one here, you can see the report in Reuters. Global climate change damage could cost 38 trillion per year by 2050, study finds. 38 trillion per year by 2050. And in The Guardian, climate breakdown will hit global growth by a third, say central banks. In Davos, in this January 2025, there were some key climate takeaways for business leaders. Now, I know they're evaluating risk and trying to save their whatever their money, but here are three of them. The cost of inaction is high. Extreme weather and other physical climate hazards could wipe out as much as 7% of corporate earnings annually by 2035. Every dollar invested in adaptation and resilience measures can generate up to $19 in avoided losses. And green markets are set to grow from US 5 trillion in 2024 to US 14 trillion by 2030. Now I'm going back to Care for Our Common Home. And I love this picture. Pope Francis, he went to Mongolia. And here he is with a Buddhist leader. And looks like they're having a very warm conversation. But he says in Laudato Si, whether religious or not, everyone can agree that the earth is a shared inheritance whose fruits are meant to benefit everyone, both today and tomorrow. God created the world for everyone. Consequently, it is not in accord with God's plan that this gift be used in such a way that its benefits favor only a few. This calls into serious question the unjust habits of a part of humanity. Note the underlying emphasis on justice here. Justice, according to Francis, is the quintessential social virtue. Without justice, there is no peace. And we'll touch more on this 3 slides further down on the this report on global wealth distribution, the percentages of intake of income by population. And you can see it's divided into quintiles here. But there's a pretty simple summary is that the top 20% of the population takes in about 81.2% of world income. It's like a 20-80 kind of thing. The bottom 80% take in 18.8% of world income. So there's an unlevel playing field here, to say the least. When we paint the world with big brushstrokes, we should also keep this in mind. And I've put the yellow here because most of the people attending the global climate meetings are in the upper yellow here, where we see in the upper 20%. Not the multimillionaires and billionaires, but we're up there. And it's easy to forget. In fact, a lot of people have never met and associated with those in the bottom 80% here. And that's where the stretched ellipse is, where Pope Francis tries to remind us of that all the time in this encyclical. Now, there's a carbon inequality when you get to the percentage of CO2 emissions by the population. This is divided into deciles, but basically the poorest 50% are emitting 10% of CO2 emissions. The richest 10% are emitting 49% of CO2 emissions. And that's from Oxfam, but there's also some other studies, including the International Energy Agency, where you can see the same thing and displayed in different ways. So we don't choose our parents, and we don't choose where we're born. And so I've got some images on the bottom. In the middle, it's the Rohingya children in culverts, sheltering in culverts. But, like I said, we don't choose where we're born and the opportunities that we come into. And but every lifestyle has an effect on the planet, and the energy and materials that go into the lifestyles of the rich are enormous. Now, the International Energy Agency analysis said that the top 0.1%, I get this here in my notes. Yes, top 1%, which is approximately 800,000 people, uh, and there are 58 million millionaires and 3,000 billionaires worldwide. They consume more than the rest of the richest 10% combined. So there's a huge indiscriminate use of the rest of our carbon budget because we are supposed to be tapering down as rapidly as possible. But the Oxfam report says this: what little carbon dioxide we can still safely emit is being burned indiscriminately by the super rich. We share new evidence of how the yachts, jets, polluting investments of 50 of the world's richest billionaires are accelerating the climate crisis. But that's just 50 of them. And this is not about pointing fingers. We're talking about justice in the good sense of the word, uh, which is not vengeance. Okay, the understanding of justice is important here. And justice refers to fairness, as in the rule of law, as in human rights, as in the contrary of racism and injustice. One of the obstacles to a more fraternal world is injustice, inequality and poverty, entrenched in economic and political systems, continues to be a significant challenge. It impacts human rights, social cohesion, and democratic stability. Children born into poverty face a higher likelihood of remaining poor. Poverty and privilege often perpetuate themselves. And I'm going to one of the reports: Earth system justice recognizes unequal responsibility for and unequal exposure and vulnerability to Earth system changes, and also recognizes unequal capacities to respond and unequal access to resources. That's from Rockstrom and the group on a Safe and Just Planet. Now back to Laudato Si, paragraph 82. When nature is viewed solely as a source for profit and gain, this has serious consequences for society. This vision of might is right has engendered immense inequality, injustice and acts of violence against the majority of humanity. The majority of humanity. Since resources end up in the hands of the first comer or the most powerful, the winner takes all. And just 2 months before he died, and while in the hospital, Pope Francis signed off on this letter to the Pontifical Academy for Life. And in it says, endorsing utilitarian deregulation and global neoliberalism means imposing the law of the strongest as the only rule. And it is a law that dehumanizes. In other places, he calls it the law of the jungle. Completely at odds with this model are the ideals of harmony, justice, fraternity, and peace as proposed by Jesus. And that's back in Laudato Si. Now I'm moving into a part of the table of contents towards an integral ecology. And these are chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, just to give you an idea of the contents. The human roots of the ecological crisis, integral ecology, chapter 4, lines of approach and action, chapter 5. And there he's talking about the macro relationships, uh, economic and political. And then ecological education and spirituality, chapter 6. Okay, to reorient the route, first humanity has to change. We are lacking a consciousness of our common origin, our mutual belonging, and our shared future. The basic knowledge, this basic knowledge would permit development of new convictions, new connections, new styles of life. Thus emerges a great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge, which implies a long process of transformation. Now, throughout the encyclical, the tone of urgency for climate change is always there, but there's this realistic appreciation that there's a great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge, a process of transformation that needs to be done. We're doing more than simply going to clean energy. We're changing our own ways of living and understanding our own paradigms and our own goals. So, to give you an example of towards an integral ecology, environmental education has broadened its goals. Whereas in the beginning, it was mainly centered on scientific information, consciousness raising, and the prevention of environmental risks, it tends now to include a critique of the myths of a modernity. And I'm going to put the rest in point form so it'll make it a little easier and clearer. Include a critique of the myths of a modernity grounded in a utilitarian mindset, individualism, unlimited progress, competition, consumerism, the unregulated market. It seeks to restore ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature and other living creatures, and with God. And I think that little bit there goes a long ways in speaking about what he means by integral ecology, a dynamic harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature, and other living creatures, and with God. And he says, of course, this education needs educators capable of developing an ethics of ecology, solidarity, responsibility, and compassionate care. Now, I know there are a lot of programs where grade school students and even high school students can go out to the local eco centers of school boards. That it happens around here in Ottawa. Uh, there's not a whole lot of linking up and networking and following through all the way through. This program here would appear to be once you get through in high school and university, because if you're critiquing the myths of modernity, that is a time for understanding in greater depth what's happening in the world. And so that's why I switched the photo here up top, because uh, environmental education should continue all the way through to the end of university. That's part of the huge change that is needed. Let's see. So there has been begun a Laudato Si movement, and currently it's in 192 countries around the world, which is interesting. There's 1.4 billion Catholics, and there's a lot of space, I think, for expanding something like that. But basically, in the action platform, you can see it reduced here, and I'll read them off in not any special order, but a response to the cry of the earth, a response to the cry of the poor, community engagement and participatory action, ecological economics, ecological education, and ecological spirituality. I'm going to read you a couple more that would tend towards ecological spirituality and integral ecology. Francis says we're in 226, we are speaking of an attitude of the heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness, which is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. He says, an integral ecology includes taking time to recover a serene harmony with creation, reflecting on our lifestyle and our ideals, and contemplating the Creator. And in 230:31, an integral ecology is also made up of simple daily gestures which break down the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness. Love, overflowing with small gestures of mutual care, is also civic and political. And he has a number of things to say about political systems and bringing more sanity and love actually into politics. So, a bit of good news, and that the great transition is underway. That's definite. In some places, gaining momentum, but I just picked out a few of the things here, and I'm sure that there could be thousands and thousands and thousands of examples. But movements like rewilding, all the movements for land restoration, uh, for smart eco-cities, agroecology and permaculture, sustainable development goals, future economies, for instance, the economy for the common good. I don't know if you've discovered that yet. And outdoor education. And one of the movements I've discovered is the AFR 100, which is accelerating Africa's locally led land restoration movement. And one of their goals is to restore 100 million hectares of land in Africa by 2030. You see the Laudato Si movement up here. There's a sign for that as well. Uh, the one thing which I've skipped over is the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's also called the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was worked out in the COP 15 or 16 of the biodiversity line. And target 3 is, some of you may have heard of this, uh, to safeguard 30% of land on the continents, 30% of fresh waters and the oceans by 2030. And it's called the 30-30-30 goal. And 190 nations so far have signed on to that. And so uh, having targets like that is certainly better than having just chaos, just like the Sustainable Development Goals. These are very important targets. And there is a lot of work that goes into why they're there and how they came to be there. You'll also see up here the smart eco cities up on the left, smart sustainable cities. Uh, there's a movement, an organization called Eco City Builders and Eco Cities Rising, and has been working since the late 1970s. It came out of California, but they've had uh, global conferences in at least 20 or 30 cities worldwide, including Vancouver. Let us go on here. Clean energy, no turning back. You'll see a graph of solar installations. This was in Bloomberg, and it only goes up to 2023. But you can see the acceleration in solar installations, which has continued since 2023. But China is making up over 50% of global solar installations. Uh, and below, from the International Energy Agency, a graph of global electricity generation by technology, 2000 to 2030. And the green curve is the overall clean energy curve. And you can see it also increasing geometrically by 2030 to over, say, 17,000 terawatt hours. So, in spite of what's happening in short term south of the border, uh, this there are so many people committed to this that clean energy is going to go forward, and those who resist it and do drill baby drill will be falling backwards, unfortunately, and not contributing their part to where the world is going and should be going. And one little other example, which I like, rewilding, and this is happening on every continent. I have an example here of the analysis in North America. The major biomes, boreal forest, Appalachian Valley, Western Wildway. It's all about restoring the both the habitat and the species, the key species, interactive species. And many of you have heard about, for instance, the introduction of wolves to Yellowstone Park and how that changed an awful lot, including the vegetation, the balance, of course, between deer who are eating the vegetation, the wolves, and everything else. You can see that the analysis goes right down to very, very finer levels. This is the middle map here, Heartland Rewilding, but it goes down below that to very local levels. And their projects are expanding more than 70 countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, Australia, Latin America, and North America. You might have heard of them introducing beavers in England and uh, many different species where they know that they can actually get a foothold and start more or less rewilding certain areas of the planet. I know E.O. Wilson figured that it should be 50% of the planet. Uh, we're talking about actually improving agriculture, but the 30% of the planet that is in the Kunming-Montreal Agreement is a good target to start with. And there was a UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is further amplifying this movement. And you could go and see that there's a link there. So here's the part that I thought I had missed. Convention on Biological Diversity, uh, 30-30-30, target 3, protecting 30% of the planet's oceans, lands, and freshwaters by 2030. Now, I have no idea of the time, but I'm coming to the period for questions. And before that, I'd like to invite you, those who are within distance, to Parliament Hill on May 12th. There's not often that we get a chance for a little bit of activism like this, and I like to do these things when I can. Uh, uh, no faith in fossil fuels, a rally for the planet. There's a group actually on a bicycle pilgrimage from Montreal, and they will arrive in Ottawa to Parliament Hill. And there's a poster making session tomorrow at St. Paul University, May 8th in the afternoon, if any of you want to go and make your posters. And so let us move on to questions, dialogue, and whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for that presentation to provoke thought, especially bringing in Pope Francis's work in this area. So we have some messages, comments, but I'm going to invite you if you have anything more to say. Paul Beckwith, you had made a note that let's see here, that the UNICEF report that Tom you quoted was from 2011, but I see Dave Doherty has updated some information too. Paul, do you have anything to comment on that? Anything to add?
My comment on that, if Paul doesn't, is that the distribution is about the same. There's a very little change in that distribution, although it was dated 2011.
Right. Thank you.
Those things do not change rapidly, let me tell you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So Anitra has another point. Anitra, do you want to unmute and come online and ask that question that you have put on the uh, on the on the chat?
Yes, thank you, Lalit. I congratulate you, Tom, for having integrated a great number of different positive movements that are happening, including 3 or 4 different biological movements that are happening, as well as some economic ones, into the beginnings of a vision. I'm very happy about that. But I wanted to point out that the Bible gives us the dominion over the earth's creatures. And one of the things I believe the Club of Rome could do was be a catalyst in the realization, awareness that we're just one of many, many species here on the planet Earth, and that we need to get along in the midst of these other species rather than having dominion over them. Pope Francis, of course, initiated Education for Hope, which is another new uh, kind of a mindset. But I wonder, in terms of your own feeling, how to transform mankind's mindset about the other creatures on the earth. What would you have people do, and in what order, to come to some kind of a balance? I hear you quoting the 30-30-30 people, and that's of interest, the regeneration. But do you have a, a solution, an overall solution?
Anitra, thank you. Thank you. That's a good question. And I want to take you back to Genesis chapters 1 and 2, because
Yes.
certainly in a large part of Christianity, other than maybe some fundamentalist and literalist parts of Christianity, there's a balance of understanding Genesis. And the biggest and most important thing is that we are to be stewards of creation. And the whole thing about dominion, to be stewards of creation. But what do we see in Genesis 2 is that not only is God planting and cultivating, but he sees that all is good and admiring creation and admiring human beings. And human beings are created from the humus, from the dirt, from the clay. And of course, we have to adjust in environmental education uh, with the best understandings of revelation, of the Bible, of theology. And so I wouldn't ever set aside all of that data that we have for, humans in the movement from primates in the last 10 million years, all the way through Australopithecines and through our, let's say 300,000, 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens and our cousins that we met on the way through Europe, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, the whole spread of human beings, because that's part of, in Pope Francis's encyclical, our common origins. These are our common origins. And so there's a lot, I think, of updating and correcting wrong opinions about what is revelation and how it is received and understood. And that's just a start. I only picked up on one part of all of your questions, and if you wanted to go further, let's continue.
Well, I wondered if you had were knowledgeable about our late member, Reverend Thomas Berry, who wrote Dream of Earth and um, the New Cosmology, the Sacred Universe, and the Third Covenant. He was like Pope Francis. He was a man from the same group that Pope Francis was from, and he had done a lot of study of Eastern religions and put them together with Western theology. And I think it's some of the most fruitful conversations that I've ever had in Clubs of Rome conversations, because he and those around him were able to integrate the way you're able to integrate moral and ethical concepts and history, along with biological, earth science, economic. And I think that's exactly the kinds of discussions that the Club of Rome should be having, the Canadian Club, the US Club, the International Club, whatever. So I applaud your brave attempt to do this.
Okay. I'm not well versed in Thomas Berry. I know a little bit about him, and I won't go further on that. And I know that there's also Wendell Berry, who is a very good example.
No, Thomas was the deep moral thinker. And
Yes.
I'll send you through Lalith, I can send you some of his books because they're definitely worth reading.
Okay. Well, if you could send them, fine.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you, Anitra. And Anitra, you had made a point also on the chat, which said that the point is that the Bible gives us dominion over Earth's creatures. So morally, there has been guidance for mankind to feel in charge of all living things as well as Earth itself. So
Right.
education for hope is a new path with the Pope Francis has initiated. So any comments on that, Tom?
Yes. Of course, to understand the Bible, you have to understand the whole together with the parts. And there's a beautiful verse in the middle in the prophet Micah that says, this is what I ask of you, O man. And he's not speaking to Israel, it's man, human beings. That is to love mercy, to practice justice, and to walk humbly with your God. And so there's nothing of dominion in that kind of a statement. There's humility, there's justice, there's mercy. And that's more or less the line that I think Pope Francis walks in.
Great, thank you. And it
Thank you.
also, yes, and goes
Thank
on
you.
to say that the question is how to transform mankind's mindset on other living beings to one of shared earth. What is your solution? I think that's was part of the process that you were putting out there for us in your presentation.
Yes.
So good. Okay, so we have Dave who has pointed us to some UN reports. So Dave, you want to say something more about that? Thank you, Anitra.
Well, in the chat, I was addressing something that Charlie Hall raised just before we started the program, which was about the importance of water as a greenhouse gas. There's a little bit of information there that starts my search on why don't we pay more attention to it. The second thing was that somebody asked, isn't there something more recent about child poverty from UNICEF? And in fact, it looks as if there isn't much, but I was only very quickly able to look through their website. You may well be able to go find more information on the UNICEF website. Canada's not doing too badly. We're not ranked 11th, so out of something like 195 countries. I do have a question now that you've decided you're going to bring me online, which is the current United States federal administration is full of people who profess to be Catholic. I think one of the best examples is J.D. Vance, the vice president. And I wonder how you can look at his behavior in relation to what you've been discussing today. What do you think of him?
Dave.
And, don't go far enough that you will get arrested tomorrow.
Dave Doherty. Throughout history, there has been amazing examples in all of the religions of deep spirituality. And there has been terrible examples of religious wars, persecution, and injustice that happens from those who are practicing, maybe not practicing, but very inauthentic in their faith. They're not carrying the message, the depth of what it is to be, whether it be a Christian, Buddhist, Muslim. And so I'm not going to go any further on that because we can be very disempowered when we think about. So I think that's very disempowering when we get into those, negative examples here and there, and there are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So Charles had a comment that he had made earlier too about the use of fossil fuels, but I see that he has moved away from. I know he's back again. Charles, do you want to make a comment? Because there are a couple other responses to your comment too that have come from John Hollins too. So Charles, you're muted. So if you unmute yourself and you want to reiterate what you wanted to say. We have also, in terms of the UN report, Claude has put another link there in the message board, so we can take that link and share that too in terms of a 2025 UN World Social Report that's out there. So Claude has put it out there as a reference. So we have next Lynn Oliphant. Lynn, you have a good question there. So would you like to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Thank you for your talk, Tom. I've always been interested in the relationship between people who believe in some sort of higher power in the form of a being, and at the same time demanding hard evidence in terms of addressing the tremendous issues that we face today. In terms of the Catholic Church, you spoke a lot about the disparity in wealth, yet the Catholic Church is a multi-billionaire corporation. And here in Canada, they certainly were dragging their feet in terms of compensating the Indigenous peoples that were involved in residential schools and in other activities with the church. But I guess my basic question is, how do you reconcile your belief system based on belief, which means not based on any evidence, but simply on faith, with the science that we need for addressing these issues? How do you relate those two? I just don't understand that.
Lynn, that's a very detailed, long, and involved question. And it goes into cognitive theory, it goes into philosophy and theology. And I don't think we would have the time to cover it all in this discussion. It's on the sidelines, and I think we could have our own discussion about it if you would like, either by email or by some other way. I have some good books and references from both Ian Barber, who has probably the most important book on religion and science, Faith and Reason. And Bernard Lonergan certainly blows it all out of the water with his understanding of human consciousness and his understanding of our movement through knowing, that knowing is certainly not just taking a look that we have questions, we have experiencing, we have questions for intelligence, and we have questions for reason, for truth, and we have questions for value. And there's a whole movement, and they're all related one to the other in human consciousness. You could call this intentionality analysis. But it's totally open. Our unrestricted desire to know is totally open. And it should be towards objective truth in any and every domain. And that's just a first little start on that, but we don't have the time really to go a whole lot further right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps we can connect Lynn and Tom for a deeper conversation on that. Wonderful. So we have actually, Claude, you had put that note out there on the UN. Do you have anything that you want to comment on?
I'll just say that was a very quick Google search. And what's dissatisfying is that they called it the World Social Report 2025. And I don't know if inequity is addressed quite as explicitly in that kind of a general social report. And just judging by the cover, they're claiming progress, and that made me smile. So it might have made a lot of us who are watching these issues unfold smile as well. But by some measure, apparently, there's making some progress. So that, I'll refer people to the report so they can skim it. And other than that, I invite other people to comment on it who know more about that report.
Thank you, Claude, for those comments. So we also have John Hollins, who has actually made a comment in response to Charles. So I know Charles is not here, but John, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you. Look, I was answering a question from Charlie Hall, which was entirely incidental to the theme of this talk. He asked if water vapor is a powerful greenhouse gas, why does CO2 matter? Something to that effect. And the answer is fairly simple. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It warms the atmosphere. Into a warmer atmosphere, more water evaporates from oceans, lakes, rivers into the atmosphere as vapor and augments the effect of the CO2. CO2 is a little bit like an accelerator in a car. You push it down, it goes faster. Thanks, sorry.
May I comment on what John just said? Okay,
Yes.
90% of the extra heat from global warming has been stored in the oceans. The oceans cover 70% of the world. And I've got a graph further on down that shows the increase. There are 4,000 Argus gauges in the ocean that measure temperatures down to 2 kilometers, 2,000 meters. And they keep track of ocean temperatures with those and with satellites. Satellites can actually get surface temperatures down to 20 meters depth. But the extra heat has been mixed downward with waves and turbulence and everything else. And there's a huge amount of energy now stored in the oceans. And the hydrological cycle is being disrupted now more and more by climate change. And they're talking about atmospheric rivers. Okay, you've heard of the Pineapple Express in BC. When so much water moves from the ocean up over an area and it just drops huge amounts. And so that's one of the causes of course, increased flooding. And so some of the things that we're dealing with, and these are very important for agriculture because it makes agriculture more fragile, both flooding and droughts. So that interruption of the hydrological cycle is important.
Thank you, Tom. We have next Leon Kolenkovics. Please go ahead, Leon.
Very good pronunciation. Can you hear me?
We
Okay. Yeah, that's one version of the pronunciation. And I wanted to preface my comment there, Tom, by saying that I grew up as a Catholic, at any rate, a very devout Catholic at that, and that I'm a great admirer of Pope Francis as popes go and as world leaders go. I also wanted to say that I was very proud to have a chapter alongside one of his in a book that was published a few years ago, an environmental anthology by New York University Press. So it was a great honor to be, shown in the table of contents alongside people like Pope Francis. But I wanted to bring up what I'm sure is no surprise to you, that a lot of us, and I'm speaking as a systems ecologist here, think is a huge blind spot in Pope Francis's and in general the Catholic Church's approach to all of these matters, and that is the population issue, both the issue of family planning and whether or not population size and growth rates have some bearing on environmental impacts in the world. I'm an acolyte and a former student of Professor Bill Rees, who spoke here a couple of months ago. And I wanted to mention something that he often does, which is that if you take the entire global biomass of mammals nowadays, 10,000 years ago, it was 99% wild mammals and 1% human biomass. At present, wild mammals constitute less than 5% of the total global mammalian biomass, human beings something like 35%, and our domestic livestock another 60%. That isn't giving the creatures that share this biosphere with us much of a fair shake. This doesn't relate directly to the climate issue, but as Bill would say, the meta issue is that we are in ecological overshoot. And human population size, I and many longtime environmentalists would argue, is part of that. But you didn't say a word about it, and nor does the church, and nor did Pope Francis, except to dismiss it or minimize it. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Leon, thanks for that. You're making things difficult.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't say a word on that because it's way too complex. But I have the whole curve in my head. You know when the human population first broke 1 billion?
I do, around 1800.
1800. And in 1950, 2.5 billion. Okay.
Right.
And now we're 8 points, I don't know the latest figure. And the curve is slowing down, and it is expected to reach 9.5-ish, plus or minus who knows what. And it might collapse even earlier because of the way we're shooting ourselves in the leg in that sense. There might be and that's nothing to be happy about. I think the Industrial Revolution starting around 1800, at least expanding around 1800, and modern medicine, there's a lot of causes there. It's not just, I think, I've never heard a priest in a parish say, go and have babies, we want big families. It's not like this movement that you might see in the US right now. In fact, that's just kind of quietly dropping away. And as you know, there have been attempts in China to limit families to 1 child, and then they changed it to 2 or whatever. That's a really difficult can of worms, and I don't think we can go into that very much further. What we're trying to do is turn the whole planet around to an ecology that is wiser.
Tom, I appreciate that response. One thing I should have mentioned too is that I was a Peace Corps volunteer for the United States in Central America. I married a woman from Honduras who grew up in a shanty town on the outskirts of Tegucigalpa, the capital. I'm well versed in those issues, and this is 40 years ago, of the church's involvement in trying to suppress family planning in developing countries. One thing I will say is that in spite of what the Vatican or Pope Francis had to say, Latin Americans on their own decreased their fertility. And now all of Latin America, that is from Mexico all the way down to Tierra del Fuego as a whole, has pretty much replacement level fertility. So in a sense, even in that respect, the issue or the problem may be resolving itself. But I've always thought, again, as someone who grew up as a Catholic and quite devout, but also as a scientist, that for the church and for someone who I admired very much, Pope Francis, not just to overlook the issue, but to actively dismiss it is a disservice, is not a point in his honor.
I've never seen him dismiss it, but I've never seen him bring it up.
Yeah.
That's my
Well, that says something right there. One is considered by most scientists as one of the major drivers or force multipliers.
Hey,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. This is very interesting. So we have Charles is back, and then John wanted to ask another question. I know that John, you had a response to Charles's comment there already, so this might give us a chance to then add to that. And then I had missed out a couple of other comments because it had come under Charles's comments. That's Rick Carpenter after that, and then Ted Manning, who's going to be after that. All right, so let's have Charles. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I really like almost all that Leon said. He sort of reflects a lot of my own perspectives, I suppose. And there's a progressive way to deal with this population issue, which is simply to work hard to give women a choice. And where women have a choice, they normally choose to have fewer children. And I think that's what I consider to be good from two perspectives. It's good for the woman and good for the planet. So we should certainly encourage all of that we can. And if we could get the church to do that, I mean, that's not my bailiwick, but that would be a good thing. Now, a problem that we have with all the good things that Tom says is that it is not reflected in our politics. And all of our politics, I'm a U.S. guy, and yours too, I think, the politicians are running on more and more whatever, and even if it's put in a progressive perspective by more universities, more whatever, all of them imply that we need more wealth, and to generate wealth, it's almost linear with using more energy and stuff and whatever. And I don't know how we can get, if you say all those good things, Tom, and then you run for your prime minister or president or senator or whatever you've got up there on those things, and somebody runs on the simple premise that you vote for me and I'll get you more stuff, you're going to lose, I think, in our country anyway. And that's a problem we have to get around, that we're a different 1%. And the other, most of them, if they're poor, they want to get to be middle class. And if they're middle class, they want to get to be upper middle class or whatever, all of which requires more resources.
Okay, I'm wondering if there's a question there, but you started out with something that is very, very, very important, Charles. And it's one of the Sustainable Development Goals on the place of women in society and education for women and girls. And if you look around the whole developing world, that is so important to get into place, to boost, to foster, to cultivate. And it changes societies also. And it also changes the economy to have women in Africa, locally led economies where they're participating greatly. And it also changes the birth rate. And that's one thing I think that Leon brought up, but there are a lot of factors that actually bring about this, let's say, greater equilibrium in birth rates. But then you went on to politics. and you didn't ask a question other than would I run, and I would say no. Uh,
Well,
and
how can somebody win an election based on running for less?
um, well, when I look to some of the more progressive nations that are doing better in the fight against climate change, I'm thinking of Scandinavian nations and others. It happens. Uh, Here you have to have
Last I knew,
populist.
Scandinavian countries were still trying to get richer.
Uh-huh. But you've seen the news in one of the one slide that I have here, and it's coming out into Davos, and it's coming out into the news. We're going to, because of climate change, take major hits year after year after year. And the huge insurance companies, Swiss Re and Lloyd, I forget all the other ones, in their analyses, saying, whoa. So all of these politicians are going to have to have reality checks, and people have to hold them to truth. And you know how hard that is, but that has to be done. And
Well, we
little
got the
ways,
biggest liar I've ever seen as our own president now.
well, okay. But little things like even the march that we're going to have on Parliament Hill here in Ottawa, uh, all those kind of events to remind people, no, the war in the Middle East and Russia's aggression against Ukraine have taken people's minds off of this huge issue, which is a code red kind of emergency for humanity. But we have to keep resetting and going back in the right direction, saying, what should we be doing that's important?
Okay, good for your optimism. Keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles. I had lined up, John, you wanted to ask another question, but shall we give Rick Carpenter and Ted Manning their
Oh, yes.
opportunity and then come back to you at the end, if that's okay with you? Thank you, John. Rick, please go ahead and ask your question. I know you had made a comment going back to belief systems, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Lalith. And I really want to thank you, Tom, for introducing this subject. It's a big one. I have to agree absolutely with Charlie Hall. We have science blinking code red. We have
Oh dear.
under the Pope blinking code red. We have good souls like you leading marches up onto Parliament Hill, doing the same thing. But still, we know that we're going to have the problem of a leadership, not just in the country to our south, but in many parts of the world, where making the country more wealthy, even though it's in the short term, is what works because of the political systems we have, because of our nature, which is to live today and worry about tomorrow. I know that you are suggesting that there is a solution through faith, and I'm very sympathetic to that. And I just made a little comment that if people have trouble with accepting belief systems, because they can be fraught and they can be contradictory, and in the minds of some people, they can be arbitrary, they might just consider compassion, which we are all equipped with at birth. And some of us learn to overcome it, but it's a very deep human quality. And that compassion extends, I think, as well to the biosphere. To listen to David Attenborough, for example, there's a man with compassion. And there are many humans who have heard him, seen his work, and they share that compassion. So I think that's a quality that's alive and well in many humans. I only just put that in as a comment. I didn't really wish to ask a question, but rather to say I really appreciate you introducing this subject and helping us to move around it and look at it from different angles. Science tells us a lot, but there's more to it, and I think you're introducing that.
Rick, may I just thanks, that's very good what you just said. And science, of course, I was speaking about justice. Pope Francis was speaking about justice in his encyclical before integral ecology. And justice is based on truth. And that's where science is so important for our truth about reality that we know and we can measure through science itself. And compassion, what we say, the things that come from the heart and spirit of the human being need to be developed. But when you're talking about politics, and I think everybody here, I think it's way too easy. I've always needed a source of sustainable hope. And it's way too easy to get cynical and then just to kind of give up and get back and just be a critic. And when just looking at politics, it'll do that. Just having too much social media, it'll do that to you. So that's why I'm here in beautiful Brazil. No, I'm just south of Ottawa. But we've seen so many studies as well that when you get out into nature, it's actually a wonderful thing for mental health. And those studies could be shared as well. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. So we're going to go for about another 10, sort of 12, 15 minutes maximum. So we have a few more now. So I invite Ted Manning. Please go ahead, Ted.
Thanks, Alith. So what's truth? And who gets to tell us which it is? And when I go to a religion, whether I like it or not, which of its many edicts do I choose? Because I'm finding that whenever I go and hear a politician speak, they'll select any line out of any part of any text from any religion, and they will tell me that it's absolute truth and we'd better bloody well spend money on it. So how do we actually identify which of the good advice that apparently is found in many of these texts and in science and in economics and in politics? How do we choose which one to follow? And it ain't an easy question.
Good. And I know it ain't an easy question, Ted. But you spoke of truth as if it's something out there floating around and we just have to look at it, grasp it, grab it. The spirit of inquiry, we go right back to Aristotle.
Yeah.
Wonder is the beginning of wisdom. And the spirit of inquiry, we call this the transcendentals. That vector that is within us in the human spirit towards what is true, towards what is real as opposed to false. Towards what is good, towards the beautiful. Those transcendentals can be liberated in every human being. And this is part of what I would say has to happen in ecological education. And they're countered by bias. There are all kinds of biases, but Lonergan, he groups them into 4 general biases. One is dramatic bias. Narcissists have it. They don't even go there. They don't ask the question. They don't have the spirit of inquiry because they have their minds stocked with opinions. Another is personal bias, and we all have it. That's our, as you know, our egotism and our desire to actually not have objective truth, but have the truth that I want for me, right? And then there's group bias. And you see that all over the place in politics. Groups that just want to continue on, and that even though they're no longer useful, even though they might be harming society. You can think of some political parties. Uh, and then there's the general bias. And Bernard Lonergan is the only one that has pointed this out. And it goes into differentiations of consciousness. And our common sense differentiation has to do with the world and me. And it does not have to do with science and theory, where we look into how things relate to each other systematically. And so the general bias of common sense is, forget all those scientists and those theorists. We can muddle through this ourselves. We know how to, it's short term, and it does not ask all the questions. So that spirit of inquiry within us, Lonergan calls it the desire to know, which is unrestricted, and it should be unbiased. And then, of course, the inquiry about, oh yeah, you've got a hypothesis, you've got something here, some kind of a belief, but is it true? That's the next set of questions for judgment, for reason. Is it really true? I mean, you know the story of Santa Claus. You understand it, but is it true?
He lives next door.
Yeah. And then questions for evaluation. Knowing all of this, what do we do? What is right and good to do, rather than what's in it for me? And Lonergan calls that moral conversion. The developing subject, he speaks about intellectual conversion, moral conversion, and religious conversion. And when he speaks of religious conversion, he's speaking about a conversion to love.
Mm-hmm.
Just first and foremost, it's a conversion to love.
Well, religions do help people define the futures that they believe to be acceptable and livable. But each religion tends to do it differently. And as I say, I consider economics to be a religion too, with its growth orientation and so on. And each is promoting a different goal for everyone to accede to. And that's just cynicism, I'm afraid. But the point is that you need culture and religion and all sorts of other elements among the components necessary to allow people to begin to build toward a future that's worth having.
Thank you, Ted. Are you going to make a comment, or shall I invite?
I was just going to
Go
say,
ahead. Yes.
distinguish a bit further. You were saying something good there, but you should distinguish ideology from religion.
Okay.
And you should distinguish, let's say, poor science and pseudoscience and poor economics.
Yep,
because
all of the above.
Some people like Milton Friedman kind of tried to tell people that there's no morals or ethics involved in economics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Ted, and Tom, for going into Bernard Lonergan's work too. So that's great. That's an introduction to his work. So, John, please go ahead.
Thank you. I will branch to my earlier comment about Charlie and CO2. But I'd just like to note that I've been following the issue of global heating, a term which captures far more than just climate change, for 4 decades more. So I've seen the graph you presented, which meandered along and then goes vertically. I find that very hard to accept. And there's a rider, the CO2 rider. When CO2 is put into the atmosphere, it doesn't wash out like, say, sulfur dioxide, acid rain. It stays up there for 100 years. So even if we stopped all the CO2 emissions today, what's up there already is going to keep heating our one and only planet. Now, that makes me think about the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic train that was parked, a train carrying oil from Boston to Montreal, that was parked above Lac Mégantic, a small town in Quebec. The engineer, there was only one on board. I guess that makes it cheaper to run the train. Did not put the brakes on properly when he parked it on the hill above the town. And during the night, it ran away. It gained speed and it eventually crashed, caused an inferno in the village, killed 47 people. The way I read your graph is that our whole globe is on its way to a serious crash. Now, can you help me from your knowledge and your beliefs come to terms with that?
Yes, I can, John, and I'm glad you brought that up because look, I was limited to what I could put in this presentation, but as you may know, of course, the ice cores in Antarctica cover fairly accurately 800,000 years of and give a record of a correlation of temperature and CO2. And of course, as you know, the CO2 never really went above 280 parts per million over that 800,000 years. But there is a huge temperature record that has come out in the last 3-4 years that goes back 65 million years, actually to the end of the Cretaceous, when the asteroid ended the dinosaurs. And you can see the temperature curve up around just after the beginning of the Cretaceous, the Miocene, Pliocene. Anyways, I forget all of the units. And you can see the CO2 drawdown. And the CO2 drawdown over history is happening because, of course, you have continental drift plate tectonics. You had India that over the last 50 million years and up to about 10 or so was moving north. It separated from Australia and it crashed into Asia. Voila. The highest mountains on the earth, the Alps. And at the same time, you also had the slightly older, the highest mountains on the earth, the Himalayas, but you had the slightly older Alps and the Zagros Mountains. And when they're so high and when they're actually being eroded, there's a chemical process going on that draws carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And there was a long drawdown of CO2 for the last 30, 40 million years. And you can see it in these records from all of the geological evidence and all of the cores in the ocean bottoms and everything else. And about 35 million years ago, Antarctica started to ice up for two reasons. Not only the drawdown and the cooling of the Earth, but the fact that it had drifted. It was attached to Australia and India way back in the time of Gondwanaland. And it moved further to the south, right to the pole. And then the Antarctic current started to isolate it from warmer waters of the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so it began developing its huge 3+ kilometer thick ice sheet on Antarctica. That had a huge change for the Earth as well. And as this cooling went on, Greenland's younger. It was about 10 million years ago it started to ice up. But as the cooling went on, the ice ages started. And so we have this cycle of nearly 1 million years in the Pleistocene of ups and downs, of ice advances and ice retreats, interglacial periods. And of course, that graph that I showed you, that chart was simply the Holocene, and it was taken out of context, but the actual degree readings on the Y scale were true and accurate. But it was taken out of the whole geological history context. And I don't know if I should go further on that, but it's true. There's a paper that I read 3-4 years ago in the National Academy of Science. It was about, is the Earth system now going to shift back into Pliocene, Miocene stage? Because of course, the best way to know what's happening, we have all of the climate change models, all the global models, but it's to study the Earth system too. How did it react and how did it move, and you know, what are the rates of change? But if we do go back there, even 3.5 million years ago, which is a wink in geological time, there was no ice in the Arctic. There was very little on Greenland. It had started icing up. There were beavers and there were actually camels in the Arctic, Ellesmere Island, and they have a fossil of these northern camels in Ottawa, and you can look that up, check it all out. But so that's one of the tipping points, is the flipping of the Arctic, where you have less and less ice on the Arctic Ocean, and so there's no albedo, no reflectivity, and more light is going into the ocean, and it warms up even more. You're getting me going on this, but I forgot what your question was.
Well, I think we are coming to an end now, but this is fascinating. Thank you very much, John, for the question, which inspired Tom to really give us some good lessons on all this too. This has been a very rich session, as you know, Tom. 18 people are still with us, so that is a testament to the topic and how you engaged with everybody too. So Dave Doherty has just mentioned that in the last 8 days, 430 ppm concentration of CO2 in Hawaii. And then Lynn has just made a comment. I'll just read it and then bring this session to a close. So as progressive as Pope Francis was in certain respects, he made it very clear that Catholics must put life first and vote for the lesser of two evils, Donald Trump. So we'll leave it at that. Do you have anything just to sort of in closing, just to close up, Tom, and then we'll hand over to Ted Manning to close the session.
Well, we're moving forward together, the whole planet, and it's important to keep that in mind, from the poorest and the lowest, and that we need to be just, and we need to be merciful towards ourselves and others. And that's what I want to say. Wisdom means we shouldn't just take the easy path, the slack path, but we should do what it takes morally and spiritually, because humanity has to change. We've seen that. We know all the negative things in politics, but humanity has to change. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Ted, please.
Thank you very much for coming. And I agree completely with Lalith. Everybody's still here. Everybody's still asking questions. And that's a very good sign. And the other thing I would say is, I think the one thing you didn't put in your list was learn how to listen, because that is critical to those of us being able to access all of the ideas and success stories and approaches that the other people can provide, whether it is from a particular discipline or from a particular community, a particular religion, the whole range of them. So that's one of the reasons why these sessions have been so rich, because we are getting a very broad range of people who are prepared both to ask questions and to listen to the answers. And that generally creates a pretty good conversation that keeps us all here and interested. So once again, I would thank you so much for contributing to this. These are always fun. We would ask those of you who have not paid your dues to us, please do so. Those of you who have not joined us yet, please go online. We are happy to invite new people who wish to contribute. So once again, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for the presentation, Tom.